The Nature of My Faith by Kiyozawa Manshi, translated by Mark L. Blum. I always seem to be discussing such things as faith, or Tathagata. But when I speak of my faith, what do I mean? What is this Tathagata to which I believe? I would like to try now to answer these questions. It should be obvious at this point that faith for me refers to how I believe in the Tathagata. This, then, calls forth two issues, believing and Tathagata. The two may appear to be two completely separate things, but as far as I am concerned, they are absolutely indivisible. On the question of what my faith is about, the answer is that it is about believing in the Tathagata. On the question of what this Tathagata is, the answer is that it is the basic reality of what I believe in. If we divide them, we could call one believing and the other what is believed in. In other words, my believing is precisely my faith, and that which is believed in by me is the Tathagata. Another way of putting it is to use the traditional categories of the individual who believes and the Dharma that is believed in. But if we insist on only using traditional categories, such as believer and what is believed, etc., we run the risk of losing our understanding of what is in fact understood. So I will not pursue this line of thought. What does it mean for me to believe, and why do I do this? What sort of effects are produced by such a thing? There are various points to consider here. Let me look at the effects first. This believing that I do has the primary effect of removing distress and pain from my life. One could call this the salvic effect. Whatever it is called, I can say that during those moments when I have feelings of anxiety or even agony, emotions which can be brought on by a variety of different causes and conditions, if this faith should manifest in my heart, I suddenly feel calmed and even joyful. The way it happens is that when my faith becomes manifest, it takes over my mind completely, such that there is simply no place left for deluded perceptions or deluded thoughts to settle and play a role in my consciousness. At that point, no matter what potentially disturbing influence or situation may occur, as long as my faith is present, such things will not be able to provoke feelings of distress or anxiety within me. Particularly for someone sensitive like myself, and especially now when my emotional state is aggravated by illness, if this thing I am calling faith were not there, it would be impossible to avoid extremes of distress and anxiety. I think, however, that such faith is just as essential for a healthy person beset with much suffering. When I speak of a religious sense of gratitude, what I am referring to is the elation that comes from having my agonies actually swept away by my faith. The second question concerns why I believe in the Tathagata. As I stated above, this situation is the result of the effects of my faith. But there are other reasons as well. Saying one benefits from the effects is only relevant after this believing has begun. For before believing, one has no idea what the effects will be, if any. Of course, one hears of the effects from others, and at that point, one may have no reason not to believe. But the impact of what amounts to hearsay never really goes beyond supposition. It is only through personal experience that one can truly know the presence or absence of the benefits of faith. But my belief in the Tathagata is not just the result of seeing the effect of this faith. It has another important basis. My belief in the Tathagata occurs at the limit of everything that I know. Aside from a time in my life when I lacked real concern for human affairs, once I seriously began to take even the slightest interest in the human condition, I felt obsessed with the question of the meaning of life. And when I reached the conclusion that the meaning of life is incomprehensible, it was at that point that my faith in the Tathagata arose. Gaining faith probably does not require that one go through such a lengthy process of inquiry, so the course of events that led me to this conclusion may indeed seem accidental. But in fact, in my case, it could not have been any other way. Within my faith there is an element which believes in the ineffectiveness of my own efforts. And to believe in my own ineffectiveness, it was necessary first to exhaust my entire range of intellectual faculties to the point where I could no longer even raise my head. This effort involved an incredible ordeal. Before I finally reached this limit I speak of, time and again I concluded that religious conviction must be such and such, only to have that conviction destroyed by subsequent experience. As long as we attempt to establish our religious grounding by means of logic or research, such upheavals are inevitable. What is good? What is evil? What is truth? What is falsehood? What is happiness? And what is unhappiness? One cannot possibly understand any of these. When I stood on the ground of understanding nothing, I threw up my hands regarding all this and came to trust in the Tathagata, and this became the focal point of my faith. The third question queries the nature of my faith itself. The answer to this is that my faith believes in the Tathagata. The Tathagata is what I am able to believe in, and, moreover, cannot help but believe in. Faced with the truth of the powerlessness of my own efforts, I know I lack the ability to stand on my own. But this Tathagata, in which I am able to believe, is the essence of what enables me to be what I am. Faced with a world filled with good and bad, truth and falsehood, happiness and unhappiness, I am one who lacks the ability to distinguish one from the other. Thus I am unable to move even an inch, right or left, forward or backward, indeed in any direction to accommodate these things. This Tathagata in which I am able to believe is the essence of what enables such a person as myself to course through this world calmly and without malice. Without believing in this Tathagata, I would neither know how to live nor how to die. I could not exist without believing in the Tathagata. This Tathagata is a Tathagata which I cannot but believe in. This, then, is a summary of my faith. In terms of my first problem of anxiety, the Tathagata for me is infinite compassion. In terms of my second problem of ignorance, the Tathagata is infinite wisdom to me. In terms of my third problem of practice, the Tathagata for me is infinite power. As such, my own faith believes in the reality of infinite compassion, infinite wisdom, and infinite power. Because the Tathagata is infinite compassion, from the moment when my faith was resolved, the Tathagata enabled me to immediately gain peace and tranquility. The Tathagata in which I believed did not wait for the next world, but brought me enormous happiness here and now. I am not saying that I have not gained various degrees of happiness from other things, but none surpass the joy of this faith. For that reason, the happiness of my faith is my greatest happiness in this world. This happiness is something that I experience every day and every night. As I have not experienced happiness in the next life yet, I cannot comment on that. Because the Tathagata is infinite wisdom, I receive its illuminating protection and am liberated from the delusions that stem from wrong understandings and wrong views. Almost unconsciously, I find myself drawn into inquiry and research by force of habit, and easily fall into a host of useless arguments. There are times when I attempted to prove the existence of infinite compassion by means of finite, inelegant speculation. Thanks to the establishment of my faith, however, even if I should fall into such illusory thinking for a period of time, it is easy for me to reflect upon the imprudence of this activity and abandon such theorizing. The aphorism, quote, "To know what you do not know, this is knowledge," close quote, may be the apogee of human wisdom, but we have a hard time accepting this. I used to hold truly presumptuous opinions, but as a blessing of my faith, I now appreciate such expressions of humility as, quote, "ignorant honen," or, quote, foolish, stubble-headed Shinran. I, too, have learned to be truly content with ignorance. In the past, though I discussed the finite and the imperfect, I still had a hard time freeing myself from the absurdity of using that limited and imperfect human knowledge to pursue a perfect standard or the reality of the infinite. In the past, I, too, feared that if we did not clarify the norms for judging truth or good and evil, that heaven and earth would crumble and society would become unmanageable. But now I have reached the conclusion that human knowledge could never create standards for truth or goodness. Because the Tathagata is infinite capacity, through my faith a great capacity is granted to me. Under normal conditions, our own considerations and discriminations lead us to determine how we will respond to things. But when something became even a little complicated, that same ability to consider and discriminate easily becomes insufficient. That is why these inquiries and researches gain momentum. When, as mentioned above, we seek out standards or search for reality, then the difficulty of deciding how to act mounts precipitously, and we become completely nonplussed. One should carefully choose their words. One should conduct oneself properly. One must not break the law. One must not violate the codes of morality. One must not breach the rules of propriety. One must not go against accepted modes of behavior. There are obligations to oneself, obligations to others, obligations within the family, obligations within society, obligations to parents, obligations to one's lord, obligations to one's husband, obligations to one's wife, obligations to siblings, obligations to friends, obligations to good people, obligations to bad people, obligations to the old, obligations to the young, etc. Such duties and obligations that arise out of the teachings called ethics and morality are exceedingly difficult to carry out. If one is serious about fulfilling all of these obligations, in the end, he or she will only end up faced with the depressing truth of the impossibility of the entire enterprise. When I ran up against this impossibility, it distressed me immensely. If I had thought that there were no alternatives but to agonize interminably over the reality of this impossibility, I would have ultimately killed myself. But through religion, I have shed this anguish, and now feel no need for suicide. In other words, through my belief in the infinite compassion of the Tathagata, today I have gained peace and calm. How does the Tathagata of infinite compassion enable me to gain this peace? The Tathagata saves me by none other than taking responsibility for everything. No matter what sins I may have committed, before the Tathagata such things matter not a whit. I no longer have any need to discern good from bad, right from wrong. In whatever I do, I simply follow my inclinations and act according to what my heart dictates without hesitation. I have no concern whatsoever as to whether or not my behavior is in error or in sin. The Tathagata graciously takes responsibility for all my actions. Simply by believing in this Tathagata, I am able to live in continual peace. The capacity of the Tathagata is infinite. The capacity of the Tathagata is unsurpassed. The capacity of the Tathagata is ubiquitous. The capacity of the Tathagata pervades every direction in its unrestricted, undefiled activity. Entrusting myself to this sublime power of the Tathagata, I gain a great calm and a great peace. I entrust my very death, my very life, to the Tathagata, and feel not the slightest anxiety or unease. It is said, quote, "Death and life are in the hands of fate. Riches and honor are the appointment of heaven." Close quote. The Tathagata in which I believe is the core reality of heaven and of destiny.